All right, let's get right into it. If you're a medical trainee, you already know that diet is a huge piece of the health puzzle. But actually counseling patients on it, yeah, that can be a whole other challenge. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to break down an evidence-based framework that gives you a practical, no-nonsense guide for having those really important conversations about healthy dietary patterns.
So first things first, let's talk about the stakes. $50 billion. I mean, just let that number sink in for a second. That's what we're spending every year in the US just on cardiometabolic diseases tied to bad diets. And honestly, that's probably a lowball estimate. We're not talking about a small problem here. This is a massive, massive burden on our healthcare system and, on people's lives.
And this slide really drives home the human cost behind that staggering number. A poor diet is right up there with things like smoking and high blood pressure as a top cause of death and disability. As a clinician, you're on the front lines and you're going to see the fallout from this every single day.
So here's how we're going to tackle this. We'll start by digging a little deeper into the high cost of diets. Then we'll get into the core principles of counseling. After that, I'll give you an evidence-based toolkit of diets you can actually recommend, show you some red flags to look out for, and finally, we'll talk about how to take all of this and put it into practice.
Okay, first up, the core principles of counseling. Before we start throwing specific diet plans at patients, we have to understand the why. What are we actually trying to accomplish with our advice?
So, what is the real clinical goal here? Because it's not just about losing a few pounds or fitting into smaller clothes. The goals are way bigger, and they touch on pretty much every single aspect of a patient's health.
And the evidence for this is it's overwhelming. Eating well can literally help people live longer. It dramatically cuts the risk for the big killers: heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, and even some cancers. But it's more than just prevention, right? It helps with weight management, makes people feel better day to day, and it can even reduce the risk of becoming frail in old age. These are powerful things you can talk about with your patients.
Now, underneath all these different diets and food choices is one basic fundamental principle: energy balance. It's really just calories in versus calories out. And let's be super clear here. Overnutrition, eating too many calories, is the #1 dietary problem linked to bad health outcomes. So no matter what diet you're talking about, getting that energy balance right is job one.
All right, let's get to the fun part. We're going to build your clinical toolkit with some dietary patterns that have serious science behind them. These are the ones you can recommend to your patients with total confidence. First up, we've got a real heavy hitter that I'm sure you've heard of: the Mediterranean diet. And there's a good reason it's so famous. This isn't some trend. It's a way of eating that has just a mountain of solid research backing it up.
The basics are pretty simple. Tons of plants, nuts, olive oil, and not a lot of red meat. But what's so compelling is the evidence. We're talking major randomized trials showing it can slash the risk of big cardiovascular events, like stroke, by almost 30%. Wow. Plus, other studies link it to a lower chance of dying from heart disease and even a lower risk for diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's.
Next in our toolkit is the DASH diet. The name pretty much gives it away: dietary approaches to stop hypertension. This is absolutely your go-to for any patient struggling with high blood pressure.
The DASH diet is all about loading up on fruits, veggies, and low-fat dairy. And the effect it has on blood pressure is just, well, it's profound. Get this. When you combine the DASH diet with a low-sodium plan, the effect is so powerful that it's comparable to taking blood pressure medication. I mean, that's incredible. And on top of that, it's also linked to a lower risk of heart disease and even colorectal cancer.
Our third tool is the whole category of plant-based and vegetarian diets. Now, this isn't just one single thing. It's more of a spectrum, from strict vegan all the way to a more flexible approach, which is great because it gives patients a lot of options. And again, the evidence is really strong here. Eating more plants is tied to lower rates of obesity, heart disease, and type 2 diabetes. We've got randomized trials that show it can bring down LDL, that bad cholesterol, lower hemoglobin A1C for diabetes control, and of course, help with weight loss. Now, the one key counseling point is to make sure you talk about nutritional gaps, like making sure your vegan patients are getting enough vitamin B12.
Okay, so we've talked about the do's. Now it's time to talk about the don'ts. It's just as important to be able to spot the dietary red flags when you're talking to a patient.
And here are the usual suspects. You've got that typical Western diet pattern. Then you can break it down into these specific things to watch out for: unhealthy fats like saturated and trans fats, added sugars, especially from sugary drinks, that's a huge one, red and processed meats, which are almost always linked to problems, and that big, broad category of highly processed foods.
These are the things you want to help your patients cut back on.
Okay, this slide is so important because it gets at a really critical point. Not all low-fat diets are the same, not even close. You see, a healthy low-fat diet, one that's packed with whole grains, fruits, and veggies, is actually linked to a decrease in total mortality. But an unhealthy one, where you just swap out fat for a bunch of processed carbs and sugar, well, that's linked to an increase in mortality. It just goes to show you, it's all about food quality, not just cutting out one single thing like fat.
So, we've gone through the evidence. Now, for the most important part of all. How do we actually take this knowledge and use it in the clinic? How do you, as a clinician, bridge that gap for your patients?
Just look at these numbers. 2/3 of patients say they get zero dietary advice from their doctors. 2/3. Now, on one hand, that's a huge gap in care, but look at it this way. It's also a massive opportunity for you to step in and make a real, lasting difference.
And that really brings us to this key idea. It frames your role perfectly. Every single time you talk to a patient, no matter how quick the visit is, it's an opportunity. It's a chance to plant a seed, to offer a little bit of guidance, and to promote healthier choices that could literally change the course of their life.
So we'll end on this thought. You have the tools now. You know the evidence, you know what to recommend, and you know what to watch out for. The only question left is, what are you going to do with it? How are you going to use this information in your very next patient encounter?